Hello, ma'am. I welcome you to my podcast, and I'm really thankful that you gave me time to come for this podcast.
Hi, Chandan, and I'm also really happy to be here. And thank you to you also for inviting me here for discussing and over a chat. Thank you so much.
To all those viewers who don't know anything and who don't have any idea, ma'am is was my MTech thesis guide. So it's literally how this all started. Like that's where I got into the field of research, and finally the idea of this channel came up, and finally how the things have been. So you can be contributed as one of the ways how these things have come up. So that's how the things came up, and you were a source
And
of all of this.
Chandan, here I would also like to add one thing to all those who are listening. In addition to what you said, that Chandan was always enthusiastic. When he was an MTech student, he used to come to me and say, "Ma'am, I want to take lectures in your ICT courses." So, this was the first time that a student, MTech student, had come to us and said that, "Ma'am, I want to take sessions in the courses which were designed for Faculty of Engineering colleges." So, in a way, Chandan, I would say that your enthusiasm also contributed, of course, in where we are or where in the platform where we are talking today.
So talking about you. So let's go a little bit about your history, about your education and all that stuff. So you have done your PhD from Punjab University. So tell us about it, and how that experience was for you, and what did you do during your PhD?
Okay. Yeah, so Chandan, as you know that I'm basically an electrical engineer. So my work in a broader sense, if I can say, it was basically the application of electrical engineering in the field of agriculture. In today's world, we can't be isolated. We can't live in isolation. So it's a kind of a multidisciplinary world. So there can be areas wherein an electronics engineer, an IT engineer, a computer science engineer, or an electrical engineer can contribute in various fields. So in that sense, I contributed being an electrical engineer, the knowledge of my domain in the area of agriculture. Now, going into details of that, we know that food security is one of the main issues in today's, not only in India, in the world. And if we talk about India, you will be surprised to know that so much of food is being wasted that almost every year the amount of food which is being wasted is almost equal to the half of the food being produced by Australia. So you see, and of course, the demand, as increasing the population, the demand for food is also increasing. So what I did was that mainly the development of low cost and fast, non-destructive method for food quality detection of food grains as well as of fruits
So
in a
which
broader
food
sense.
grain you tackled in your work?
Yeah, it was mainly Indian wheat. So
Indian
we
wheat.
took the samples of Indian wheat. Apart from that, there were other works also like for fruits, dried fruits also for peanuts, etc. But if we talk about food grains, it was mainly the Indian wheat I worked upon, because being in Punjab, it was easier for me to collect the samples, and that is the main staple food in Punjab also.
I tell you, like one term that you have mentioned while stating your work was low cost. Low
Right.
cost is something that drives most of the research that has been happening around us. But what I have seen is that okay, you want to develop something at a lower cost. It's totally fine. But in the process of developing something at a lower cost or reducing, we somehow sacrifice on its accuracy, on its
Mm-hmm.
quality, and all those other important factors that we also use. Like we have sensors that might cost around 5,000, and we also have the 100 or 200 same kind of sensors,
Right.
but it's very obvious that their accuracy will not be so much same as that of Python. So
Mm-hmm.
my point is, in your work, when you were trying to develop something at a lower cost, how you take care of that factor that still you have that kind of accuracy and precision and the quality while maintaining a lower cost?
That's a very valid question, Chandan. Definitely, you can't compromise with the accuracy. You can't compromise with the quality of, ultimately, because that somewhere your purpose is not solved in case you compromise with that. So definitely, accuracy was one factor which was kept in mind while developing the embedded system, the low-cost embedded system. So what I did was mainly, if not everything, but I talk about one aspect. Let us take the moisture content of, let's say, the 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 moisture content of the grains. If we talk about, then the ones which are available in the market, they are mainly capacitance based. Okay, I'm not going to much technical details, but they are mainly capacitance based. Okay, so but in those moisture meters, there are lots of issues. For example, they don't take into consideration the density variations. For example, for a big samples, you may be having small pockets wherein high moisture is there, but in some other cases there may be low samples. So all those aspects they don't take into consideration. Then it also depends upon temperature variation is there, then frequency variation is there. So what I did was that I did not use the capacitance variation. Instead, I explored that, okay, what can be a different technique which I can use, wherein all these factors can also be accounted for, but at the same time, low cost is also maintained. So that is where the idea of using the impedance spectroscopy came into picture, because impedance spectroscopy as of now is being used in medical field, but in agriculture or for grains or for moisture content, or let's say for food quality analysis, impedance spectroscopy was not used. So by using that technique, the all factors like which were reducing the accuracy, as I told, I gave you some examples like density variation, etc. They were also taken into account, and at the same time, cost was also kept minimum. So here in some situations, or in any situation, I would say that it's like going through an innovative design, wherein you can think of some other technique by which your accuracy is also maintained and your cost also doesn't show. So that was the key.
That's good. That's good. So coming on to the next step, you have also been a visiting scholar in Richard like Russell Lab in USA. So how did that came through, and how was that thing? How was that experience?
Yeah, that was a wonderful experience. Actually, what happened was that in 2013, if I remember correctly, I had published two SCI very good impact factor papers. I had worked here and I had published that work. And there was one scientist who was working in, there is one organization called USDA, that is United States Agriculture, Department of Agriculture. That's a very big thing there. So he was working in this Richard research lab in Athens in USA. So he sent me a proposal that we are also working in a similar field, and we have one opening here for a visiting research scholar. And in case you are interested in working in a similar field, then we would like to invite you. So that is how the thing started. Then, I applied for my office, and also in 2014, I went to the state, in the state of Georgia. There is one place called Athens. No, before Athens, it was Albany. So there was a Dawson peanuts research lab. Now, before going into details, I would like to tell you that in the state of Georgia, their main staple food is peanuts. Okay. Literally, they people live on peanuts, like peanut butter, then peanut oil, and their main food is also mainly comprised of peanuts. So there they have this dedicated lab which is working on it. That is called Peanut Research Lab in Dawson. So that is where I first went, and for few months there I developed some, again, low cost and fast, non-destructive technique for moisture content determination in peanuts. Because when you talk about moisture content, it is at every stage. for every food,
Mhm.
starting from wherein we need the time for harvesting, to storage, to processing. Everywhere you need the accurate amount of moisture. And if it is not taken care of, your whole lot gets destroyed, molds and all those things. So right now the technique they were using were laboratory based. They were time consuming because they used to send them to laboratory, and their dedicated person used to measure it, and then sometimes. So what they wanted from me was that develop some fast, that is what I'm saying, rapid, non-destructive, because the techniques they're using in the laboratory, they are destructive methods in the sense that they destroy the sample. So it was like online, if you can give us, and of course low cost should also be there. So that is where the knowledge of my embedded system came into picture. So I applied the knowledge of my sensors, instrumentation, and I developed those techniques using microcontrollers and embedded systems. And then after a few months, then they sent me to their another laboratory, that is the one you are talking about, that is Russell Richard Research Lab, that is in Athens. There I mainly worked on developing instrumentation for the moisture content in dried fruits. Apart from that, also determination of, various quality parameters like you see, whenever you take a food packet, you can see all those contents, that what is the amount of protein in this, what is the amount of fats, fatty acids, carbohydrates and all. So as of now, they were sending again to the laboratory. They have a laboratory, they have costly equipment there in lakhs of dollars, in, we can say, or in Indian rupees. And again, that was a time consuming process.
Mhm.
So there I developed low cost, rapid, again using impedance spectroscopy method for the determination of all these quality parameters like lipid profile, proteins, fatty acids in peanuts as well as in dried fruits. So it was a wonderful experience getting to know about the culture of work culture in USA. That was, that was a very enriching experience for me, apart from, of course, building up the knowledge domain, which really helped me in my PhD, because that was also a part of my PhD.
Okay,
And
so
you
this
won't
was
believe, Chandan,
during your PhD, right?
yeah, this was a part of
Okay.
my PhD.
Okay.
So yeah, I can say that from almost 8 chapters of my PhD, I can say that 4 chapters which I could write and I could make publications, they were from the work which I did there. It was a very enriching experience. They have very good research facilities, and they're very, work culture is very, very nice. You get to learn a lot of things there.
Mhm. So what is that one thing that you have learned there? Like either in the terms of how to do the research or in the terms of work culture that you would like to implement here also.
Okay. One thing which I really found different there was that during the work hours, they will not, apart from the lunch break, they will not waste even a single minute, those dedicated hours are only for work. The moment it is 4 o'clock, they will all, wind up everything, go home, enjoy. So it's not like keep on sitting in the lab, so you're considered a hard worker. That culture is not there. But when you're in the lab, then all your time, every single second of your time should be for the lab, should be for the work. That is one thing which I really appreciate about them. Second, of course, the research facilities which they have is also, they're amazing. Why it is so? Because there is a lot of freedom which is given to the researchers in purchase. Here, one hindrance in the research is the purchase process itself takes so much of your energy and time that sometimes you waste all of your time just in the purchase process, and by the time your work starts, your project has to come to a term. So there they have given those credit cards to their every scientist, and they have free will to purchase whatever they want, and of course there is honesty. So they know that they do not misuse
Go
those.
over the limit or something like that.
That kind of work culture is really, appreciable, which I really liked about that. And if such things can come to India, I would really say we have no dearth in manpower. Human resource management in India can be our biggest asset. if it is put in the right direction.
Indeed, indeed. So currently you are a faculty at a national institute, which automatically comes along with its own responsibilities. So how you feel about that? Like handling those responsibilities that have been on you just because that you are a faculty at a national institute.
Right. You very rightly said, Chandan, that working at a national institute definitely comes with its own package and responsibilities. But at the same time, there is a sense of pride also associated with it. For example, as you said that when if you talk about responsibility being a national institute, then your outreach is at the national level. You are not confined to a certain region, so you get to work with people of all cultures and all, and your outreach in it of course it expands. At the same time, if I talk about my organization, that is NITTTR Chandigarh, we are directly under Ministry of Education. So there are many government schemes wherein our work domain can be implied with that. For example, if we talk about this national education policy, which came in 2020, the NITTTR NITTTR was given responsibility when nobody even knew what NEP was. We were conducting workshops for faculty, we were conducting seminars, and from those seminars and conferences, we were developing modules which were sent to the ministry for further consideration. Similarly, if we talk about the Atmanirbhar Bharat scheme, which was launched by our Honorable Prime Minister, so at our institute, we have a separate Atmanirbhar Bharat task force. Fortunately, I am also a member of that Atmanirbhar Bharat task force. So there also, under that area, we conducted many workshops and seminars, and there were interactions with industry people under that, and then accordingly, so of course sense of responsibility is there, but at the same time you get to work in these domains and directly working for such policies. It definitely brings a sense of pride to us.
As you said that you made courses, that modules for the faculty, right? So, and as far as I know that you have been also doing the same work for students too, for faculty also for students too. So my question is that creating a course for students and creating a course for faculty, how same are they and how different are they?
Okay. Yeah, like you said that we are conducting short-term courses for faculty also, and we are conducting training program for the students also at NITTTR. So yeah, of course, the similarity is that when we conduct a course for the teachers, we do not start at a very high level. We firstly begin with the basics, and then it's a kind of takeoff of an aeroplane. So we start with the basics, and then we keep on adding more of research elements also, because many of the teachers, they are also interested in pursuing their PhD and all those things. So there is a flavor of research when the courses are designed for faculty, whereas for students, especially if we talk about BTech students, we have training programs. There not much stress is on research, because in BTech you don't expect the students to do the research. It is mainly on emphasis is given on their curriculum oriented training. Plus, they are also given a glimpse of what is happening in the industry. So that is also quite a similarity if we talk about like what is happening in the industry, how we tell the teachers as well as the students is because we have well equipped labs which are which are like, for example, in our electrical engineering department, we have a center of excellence in hardware and loop in collaboration, the Typhoon HIL. So Typhoon HIL is a Switzerland based company. So students as well as the faculty, they get to know, okay, these are the things which are being done in industry. So there the common factor comes into picture, but the difference, it's mainly the research element which I can think of.
So you have somewhere mentioned that you make you make courses for Swayam. So what
So
is that? That like what is Swayam and what like all like what is all that stuff?
that's a very good question, and Chandan, because many people are not aware about this initiative by the Ministry of Education. Swayam is a platform which was launched by Ministry of Education, which was kind of, if you have heard about the courses by Coursera, edX, etc., and they come with a very high price. So the Ministry of Education launched this Swayam platform wherein MOOCs courses were launched for the students as well as for the faculty. So what is it is basically MOOCs is nothing but massive online open online courses.
Okay.
So therein, so if I talk about what exactly are these Swayam courses or what exactly are these MOOCs courses are that one thing is a live training. For example, right now we are using this technology, ICT technology. We are live talking. For example, I may be giving you a lecture which is live. But in these MOOCs courses or on the Swayam platform, the courses which are there are the recorded lectures are already there. And suppose it's an 8-week course, so we develop modules for 8-week course, and every week we have defined, okay, for this is week 1 or the module 1. These are the 5 videos I'm going to tell. So the duration of that video also will be maximum 10 to 15 minutes, because a human mind, if we say that it cannot process information for more than 20 minutes, it begins. So the main agenda was that keep the videos to, let's say, 15 minutes, then develop some instructional material for them. Plus some of the part you can give assignments or quizzes, and some can be like a feedback or discussion part. So the whole, it is a kind of 4-quadrant approach, wherein a part are the videos, part is 1/4 is your instructional materials, then assignments and discussions. So therein the whole topic is like divided into that, and accordingly, we keep on uploading the pre-recorded videos which we have already developed, and at the same time when the course starts, we keep on giving the assignments, and then there is a discussion forum wherein the people put their queries to us, and we answer them.
So when you develop a course for Swayam, what is your mindset at that time?
Yeah, mindset, as I already said, is that we have to make the contents of my video lecture in such a way that it should cover also the entire content, but it should not go into very detailed, because, as I said, the time constraint is there. Your video has to be only maximum 10 to 15 minutes. So you have to cover the basics also. And then you have to think, okay, for this particular topic, when I have to make the instructional material, what part detailed material should be there? So that, for example, you don't want to listen 1 hour to what I'm saying. In my 10 or 15 minutes, I just give you an overview of the topic. And then I upload that instructional material, which you can at your own pace. Like suppose person is working, he doesn't get the time during the day. So at night or maybe on weekends, he can devote particular time for the particular session and then for the material. And accordingly, next week I can upload the quiz and they can answer. So that is your topic will also be covered, but it will not be a dragging 1 hour lecture. That is the main thing which we have to keep in mind while designing a MOOCs course.
So your Swayam course talks about the big data and analytics for smart grid. So
Right.
tell us about it, like what it is and what does it do.
Yeah, actually I developed 2 MOOCs courses on Swayam. The first one was real-time power system analysis in smart grid. And the second course was this big data analytics for smart grid, which was again rerun also because it was very popular. So if I talk about big data analytics in smart grid, in a gist, if I can say that the main difference between our smart grid and a conventional grid is the amount of data which is being generated due to the inclusion of various sensors, smart meters, smart appliances, which are continuously, the data we are communicating being earlier in our conventional grid. the consumers, they were the silent ones. They didn't have much say. They were only at the receiving end. But when you talk about the smart grid, the consumers are also communicating. So it's a two-way communication. So because of all these, then apart from that, there are smart sensors which are installed along the transmission lines and at the premises of the customers. Then there are smart meters. So all these are sending the data. And the amount of data is very huge. That's why it's called big data. So now a power system engineer doesn't know what to do with this data. So that is where the role of big data analytics comes into picture. So in a nutshell, if I can describe. Otherwise, so you can attend 8.
I would love to come for that. I will really like to come for that. Okay, so coming back to little small things. Like when you have to select a student, like you might not be knowing, but you also take student for MTech and PhD under you as a guide. So if you have to select a criteria, you have to set a criteria in order to select a student for either either PhD or MTech. So what will be your criteria?
You see, when I'm selecting a student for my PhD, definitely the first criteria is that I check whether the student has a bent of mind for the research or not. That can be judged from, from the MTech thesis, MTech work, which he has done for his dissertation work. So that speaks a lot about, about the research bent of mind of the student. And if he has done some publications already, of course, in MTech level, we don't expect a student that he should be publishing SCI. Of course, it should be there, but yeah, they have many constraints because they have to finish their thesis in time, But again, it has to be good publication. And then then I first ask them that what is the area wherein you want to work upon. It's not like I impose my wishes on you. So suppose they tell me, then what exactly is that area according to the latest what is happening in the industry, or the latest research area is there, what kind of homework they have done before coming to me, whether they have studied or not. So all these things I definitely check before actually taking a student. And outcome of that PhD, that is also important. It shouldn't be like only publishing papers, whether something can be done for, development of some, maybe a device, or some patent can be filed or something, like if it can be useful for the industry. So all those things also. What is the bent of mind of the student? I firstly judge that.
So this brings me to the last question of this podcast. Like as you said that that what is the mindset of the student that you will consider while selecting a. So what according to you should be the criteria for doing a PhD? Like whatever are there, that's fine, but what according to you should be?
I think I already answered this question of yours when I said that the outcome of PhD. When I said about that, so because whether the outcome of your research leads to some like maybe development of some technology which can be useful for industry, whether there is a novelty in it that you can some kind of new technology you have done, what is the percentage of the novelty and what is your we can say contribution, that is very important in determining the criteria of the PhD research work. Of course, publications are very important, definitely. Why high quality research publications are given stress upon is because the publication process goes through a lot of rigorous review process. So when your paper is published in a good research publication, so definitely when it goes through that rigorous review process, that means that your work speaks itself. But apart from those publications, I think these things should also be there, that whether is it of some use to somebody, to maybe industry or maybe society also. Society also, whether it can help the society in some way. So these things should be the criteria.
So thank you so much for being on my podcast. Thank you so much for giving me time. And I'm really thankful for all of these great answers that you have given as a part of this podcast.
Again, thank you, Chandan, for inviting me. And I know how the time flew. It was just like, when you were conversing, I was also enjoying a lot, because you started from my PhD, and then you took me back to my USA days and all those work at my knitter and Swayam. So I really enjoyed a lot. And I hope that those who are watching this broadcast, they will also be a little bit of inspiration. If they can get from what I talked, then I would really think that it was useful and it was worth. Thank you. Thank you once.